Trump recently signed an executive order that he says will help American families buy homes and stop Wall Street landlords. But if you actually read the bill, it looks like it's going to do the exact opposite. Instead of helping working class people buy affordable homes, this might accelerate something we're already seeing across the country: corporate landlords buying up entire neighborhoods and an entire generation that might be forever renters. Today, I brought on Cam from Courier to talk about this story in detail and go over how dangerous this is for the average worker. Cam, how you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, Mason. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm excited to go over this with you. I saw that on Below the Beltway, you talked about this extensively. Can you give people just like a quick summary or synopsis on what it is they should expect from this video?
Yeah, so essentially, there were two what could be seen as monumental pushes on affordable housing put out about a month or so ago. One from the legislative branch with Representative Summer Lee in Pennsylvania and Ro Khanna in California, and the other is an executive order from Donald Trump. And at face value, they look like they're trying to do the same thing. They say they're trying to reduce corporate landlords and make houses affordable so people can actually become homeowners and accumulate wealth. But when you look under the hood a little bit, you see that they are actually quite different. And one of them aims to achieve that goal, while the other one aims to make rich people even richer. And I, you can guess which does which.
Yeah, it really seems like the MO of this bill is helping Wall Street become your landlord. And I don't know how beneficial that is to the average American family who wants to be a homeowner, who actually wants to build wealth for their next generations. One of the things that really stood out for me in what you wrote up, Cam, was that a lot of these restrictions, it's basically incentivizing a lot of loopholes within this executive order. One of the restrictions doesn't apply to build to rent, which are specifically for rental properties. And that means developers literally have a new incentive to build corporate rental neighborhoods, which means more rental supply, less forced sale actually housing, and higher home prices. If builders can avoid restrictions by just making properties rentals, aren't we literally just steering the market away from home ownership?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's worded in a kind of clever way, and unless you take time to read it, but the executive order basically says we are going to stop prioritizing, helping people buy homes or helping developers, giving developers tax breaks for homes if they do these certain things. But the exception, like you said, is if the property is built to rent. So if they're building apartment complexes, duplexes, even if they're building some of the intention that it's a short-term rental, like a bunch of Airbnbs, then none of these rules in the executive order apply. And so not only is it deregulating the entire industry, but it's also, like you said, just incentivizing builders to build to rent, build rentals. And that means if they're focusing on that, there's going to be fewer houses that people can actually buy. And that, of course, supply and demand. If there's fewer houses for people to buy, those prices are only going to go up. And for everyone who already owns a home, that's probably nice. But for everyone else, that means that they won't be able to buy a house and they're stuck in these rentals. And not to go off on a tangent, but then if there's more people forced to rent, then that allows landlords to charge more and more for rent because they know their tenants aren't going anywhere, because they know there's not going to be have an empty unit because people aren't buying houses.
Yeah, when people are forced into decisions, it kind of makes it easy for the people that actually own those means in order to do as they please. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's great for people who already own homes. They keep seeing their housing prices go up. It's also really great for institutional landlords. But for me, I'm a Zoomer here, and there's a lot of Zoomers that propelled Donald Trump into the White House again. He gained a lot of support amongst young men specifically who saw him as a potential to actually build financial futures and actually have decreased housing prices. It seems like all of that was just a complete lie. If this is literally a wealth protection policy for current homeowners rather than home ownership, what do you think that that's going to lead to insofar as like young men who supported Donald Trump in droves in the past? What does that look like in the future, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think if any of them are considering buying a house, if anyone's sick of paying rent, especially if someone's, they're out of college, they're out of the dorms, or whatever, they're out of their parents' house, and they have to start paying those bills, it's going to hit harder and harder every single month. And if that's your only option, and you were promised, hey, I'm, if Trump promised that he was going to make houses more affordable for people to purchase, and then you look and housing prices are getting more expensive, and then you couple this with another policy that he proposed last year, which was to almost double the length of a mortgage to 50 years, which is essentially just renting for 50 years, because until you finish paying that mortgage, you're just renting from the bank. And so if those are the only two options, I know for me, I'm a little older than the Zoomer, but that's absurd. That's unacceptable. That's not a future worth investing in. And so, the younger you get, the less likelihood there is of upward mobility like that. And it just feels hopeless.
When I saw that 50-year mortgage plan, you're paying more on the interest than you are on the home. Like,
Yeah.
you're almost
Yeah.
doubling the
No,
price of the house on interest alone. You're not getting any extended value. It blows my mind. I don't know who's helping him draft these policies. I can't imagine a world where Donald
I
Trump is
got an
coming
idea.
up with these policies himself. But the fact that he thinks that these are good, I digress. Insane.
Yeah. Well, I,
One
I
of
mean, what do you expect from someone who made a bunch of money in real estate, that they're going to cater towards the people who make money in real estate, not the people who actually need
Shocker.
homes to buy?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, 50-year mortgages, that's just as scammy as the car salesman who tries to give you a lower monthly, but then you're paying, out the ear in interest by the end of the loan term. It's absurd. And it's one of those things where if you're short-sighted and you don't put too much thought into it. And so, a lot of people, when they're going to school, they're just starting out their adult lives, they maybe don't have time to think those things through. And so that's an enticing campaign promise. But when it actually comes down to living life and having to experience these things for yourself, like reality hits you pretty hard.
Yeah, no, most definitely. One of the biggest things that stood out from Trump was directly saying that he doesn't want housing prices to come down. And the US housing crisis really has like this internal contradiction of those that are homeowners, most of their assets are in their own property that they live in.
Yeah.
And that can create a lot of instability and a lot of confrontation when you have people that are just entering the workforce who want to eventually be a homeowner one day. I was looking at a stat from in the 1970s. It was about 4 year, or I think it was about 10 years of your average salary that it required to actually purchase a home for the average person. Now it's doubled to 20. And in some cases across the country, I mean, I live here in California. I know in California and New York and a couple other states, it's almost impossible for anybody to afford a home that's starting out with a new job, or even that has been in the workforce for a decade. Seems very it draws up a lot of anxiety and insecurity. Is there any world where you can make housing more affordable without allowing prices to cool, or is this just politically impossible?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first and most obvious thing is regulations that focus on the consumer, and not the person making the money off of these deals. Is, prioritizing first time home buyers, first generation home buyers, families who are actually going to live in the houses and not use them as a profit center. But then really, it also goes back to a living wage. I mean, California is a great example. They have a higher minimum wage, but it really still hasn't kept up with the cost of living there. Phoenix, that's where I lived most of my life, it had the same problem. It was seen as one of the most affordable places in the country, but then affordability, things get more and more expensive years gone on, and wages remain stagnant. And so, if you're making the same money in the year 2000 as you are in the year 2020, of course that's not going to go as far as it did 2 decades ago. And so it's, there's the wages side of things, but as far as housing legislation or regulation, it goes to who the priority is. And with Donald Trump, the priority is making rich people richer. And I honestly feel like with these sort of proposals where he's saying he wants to keep homeowners wealthy, he's playing into this, like the 2008 housing crash generational trauma, where there were all these people who worked really hard to buy homes, and they were deceived, essentially scammed by the housing market, to take on loans they couldn't afford. And so people lost all of their wealth. All that money was wiped out, hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings, per person, money they had invested into their mortgages over the years to pay off their house. Hardworking people lost a ton of money, and the people who got bailed out were the banks and the big private companies. And so this is just more of the same, but I think a little bit more brazen.
Yeah, it's really in your face, as far as like the wealth transfer that he's trying to continue to further. Um, there's always going to be a wealth transfer. It's either going to be from working class people to those that already own most of these institutions, or the government's actually going to step in and help first time buyers, like you said. We need more stimulus for those that are the ones that are needing it the most, as opposed to those that are pretty comfortable right now with a house that has tripled or quadrupled or quintupled in some cases in value. I know there's, I mean, my parents' home, for instance, has more than tripled in value in just about 7 years. It's crazy to see the boom, which is great for people who are already homeowners, but we need something. We need some sort of plan for those that are actually entering the housing market. Are we watching housing really turn into like this kind of corporate control that we've seen in healthcare and media and tech? It seems like there's a general trend in all of these industries of those that already own as much as they can, continuing to double, triple, quadruple that.
Yeah, no, and honestly, the problem goes back to it being such a mandatory thing to accumulate wealth in the United States. Practically, if you want to build generational wealth, you have to own property. And because there's so much money invested into that, it becomes a predatory thing for these bigger companies. They see where anyone's investing money, like that, like these tech companies, a ton of money is getting invested in AI. And a few years ago, a bunch of money was getting invested in crypto. And because so much is being invested with the hopes of, oh, someday I'll be able to sell my house and retire and have a lot of money, or someday I'll be able to, sell the stocks in this AI company, or, trade my crypto. Because there's so much hope riding on these single purchases, they're ripe for fraud and scams. We saw that in '08 with housing. We were seeing that happen now with crypto. And that's what's about to happen with artificial intelligence. Is a bunch of money's going into these companies, and it's just not a sustainable thing long term. But it is a good thing for the people who are actually making money off of this.
They call them bubbles for a reason. I mean, they are eventually going to pop, and that only leaves the working class people holding the bag, while those that own most of these industries have already sold. They've made their profit. They're good to go. Um, yeah, kind of crazy. Kind of, I don't
A little
understand how
bit.
you run a society like that long term. It is completely unsustainable. The executive order also had this vague, like, what actually counts as a large investor. I saw that in the EO, and I feel like that interpretation could mean anything. And you speak more
Right.
to that.
Yeah. So the executive order, it imposes restrictions on large scale investors, but it doesn't give any distinction as to what that means. So what we've seen from the Trump administration this time around is what that means is the large investors are the ones who don't pay into the Trump administration system. Large like Blackstone, the who own millions of properties. I'm sure that they will not be considered a large scale investor, even though they're one of the largest single family homeowners in the country, because they pay off the Trump administration. They paid into the campaign contributions, they pay into different Trump properties and investments. And that's what that ambiguity leaves it open for, is corruption, because then it allows them to set the standard of what's a large scale investor on a case by case basis. And so anyone who can afford to pay the toll isn't going to be a large scale investor, but anyone who doesn't, suddenly they're going to be blocked. And we could even see that they do it by market size. And so this this, I mean, this maybe began hyperbolic, but anything the past year and a half that's felt like that hasn't been the case. But this could be something where it could actually bar smaller scale investors, like people who are buying, like say a family saves up and they buy a duplex. Well, what if that's considered a large scale investment based on whatever criteria is being set? And suddenly regular people who are just trying to earn a little bit of extra cash are going to be prevented from buying these properties while these huge corporations are able to kind of swoop in and take them instead. I mean, that's what we've been seeing the past couple of years. And this executive order, I feel like only allows that to accelerate.
Yeah, I mean, shifty language that really just breeds corruption. Seems like a prioritization of Wall Street. Don't think this bill is helping the average person. But I did see the Stop Wall Street Landlords Act. There's a lot of good in there. Can you speak to some of the positives of what that alternative could actually bring working class people?
Yeah, and this actually, interestingly enough, this ties right into the executive order, because the large caveat that I'll add to this executive order that Trump put out is that it's like all of his decrees. It doesn't really have any power or authority to do anything. It
Mm.
says a lot of stuff. It tells people in his cabinet to do certain things with their departments, but it doesn't change anything long term or any through legislation. And he even admits that when he was signing it, he said, this my ideas need to come with legislation. We need bills that can actually be passed that can make these changes definite. And he didn't mention this bill from Representative Summer Lee and Ro Khanna, because although it does what he says his executive order will do, it doesn't actually do what he wants it to do. Because what this bill does is it does limit and restrict large scale investors. It caps it. It caps who can be an investor. It adds different regulations to who can buy homes. It adds taxes to large companies who are mass purchasing homes. It then uses those taxes into something called the Housing Trust Fund, which is basically a public fund to help people buy homes and help people prevent eviction. And it takes away incentives and loopholes that investors are using to buy homes and outbid regular people.
Do executive orders like Trump's actually even like change the market in general, or is it just like political signaling and messaging?
Honestly, it's mostly the latter. It does direct like the Housing Urban Development and the Department of Interior to do certain things within a 30-day time period, but that 30 days passed and none of them have done anything. So no, it's only as enforceable as the executive branch can enforce it, and it doesn't even look like they're doing the part that they said they'd do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see this at all having any bearing in any state, but I haven't predicted a lot that's happened from this Trump administration. It's pretty chaotic, and I think that people just have to be vigilant and seeing how it actually affects their day to day. But it really seems like there's two realities that the American worker is faced with. It's option A, we have housing as a wealth asset, prices always rising, people becoming forever renters and never actually being able to own their own home. And then part two, where housing is more seen as a public good, the government actually invests in those that are entering into the housing market and things are stable and affordable. Seems pretty clear like which one is the better option. I don't see how Trump can sell this to the American people. I mean, he got a lot of backlash from conservatives when he mentioned both the 50-year mortgage and saying that housing prices won't be touched. They're only going to keep going up. I don't know how any populist movement can sustain itself when not working for the popular people that push that movement into success.
Yeah, I mean, really, it only applies. The only people who think that Trump's plan is superior are, one, people who are already rich and they know that they can game this system to make more money, and two, people who think they can hustle it. People who are, like as the old saying goes, like temporarily embarrassed millionaires who are broke, but they think that somehow they can work this into their favor, and the downsides won't apply to them, and they're going to come out on top, and it's going to be great. But with every other initiative Trump has done, that has proven to not be the case. The people who think they can hustle end up getting scammed, and the people who are just trying to make an honest living and get by get hurt even more.
Where can more people learn more about both the executive order and the Stop Wall Street Act? Where can people find more?
So I did do a write up of it in my newsletter below the Beltway. It's on Substack if anyone wants to check it out. I also put together a little breakdown video that's on Courier's TikTok and Instagram. But honestly, I think the best way to figure it out and to get a better understanding is to read through the executive order because it's not very long, and read through the bill because it's pretty easy to understand. It walks through the process pretty plainly. I would also recommend anyone reach out to their representatives in Congress to ask them about it, because presumably they'll be asked either to sponsor it or vote on it eventually. And so getting their perspective and letting them know how you want them to vote allows them to do a better job representing people. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, you just can't treat housing as a retirement account and just expect young people to be able to afford to get in there at the same time. I'm hoping things change, and I appreciate all the reporting that you do, Cam. Hope everybody continues to stay vigilant and is made aware of what's actually happening in regard to their financial future.
Yeah, definitely. No, thanks for helping to get the word out. It's something that affects everyone, and so hopefully people pay attention.